There are black flakes in your eggs, not burnt bits, flakes. Thin, brittle, about the size of a pencil shaving, and they came off the pan you spent all of last Sunday seasoning. You did 4 coats. You watched the video twice and followed it exactly. You bought the specific oil the comments told you to buy. It came out of that oven glossy and black and looked better than anything hanging on a rack in a store, and you stood there holding it with an oven mitt, feeling genuinely proud of yourself. And now, 3 weeks later, it is peeling like sunburn. There is a gray bald patch in the middle where everything sticks now, and it is spreading a little every week. The handle has a tacky, slightly sticky feel that never quite washes off, no matter how hot the water is. And somewhere in the back of your mind is the quiet suspicion that you did something wrong, even though you cannot point to a single step you skipped. So you strip it and you start over. And this time you do 5 coats, because clearly 4 was not enough. It comes out perfect again. It lasts a little longer this time, maybe 5 weeks, and then a corner lifts, and you catch it with your thumbnail, and a piece the size of a postage stamp comes away in one clean sheet. Notice what you did there. Every single time it failed, you added 1 more coat than the time before, because obviously the problem was that you had not done enough. Hold on to that thought, because in about 4 minutes it is going to turn out to be the entire story. Eventually the pan goes to the back of the cupboard. The nonstick comes back out, and the cast iron becomes a thing you own rather than a thing you use, which is the saddest possible ending for an object specifically designed to outlive you. Meanwhile, there are skillets in daily use right now that were poured in foundries that shut down before the Second World War. Pans with a maker's stamp from 1910, black as a piano, slick enough to slide a fried egg across without a spatula, sitting on a stove in somebody's kitchen tonight, being used to make dinner the way they have been used to make dinner for 115 years. 3 generations of one family have cooked on some of these. Nobody in 1920 owned a spray bottle of seasoning oil. Nobody in 1920 had a temperature probe or a subreddit or a 9-step method. They did one thing differently from you. One thing. It takes about 20 minutes of actual hands-on work. It uses oil that is already in your kitchen, and it is the exact, precise opposite of what you have been told to do. And once you see it, I promise you cannot unsee it. You will spot the mistake in almost every seasoning video on this platform, including some very popular ones within the first 30 seconds. Now, we are going to split this into 2 parts, because there is no point building a good surface on top of a bad one, and that is exactly why your last 4 attempts came apart. Part 1 is the rescue. Getting rid of what is already failing on your pan right now without a lye bath, without a self-clean cycle, and without wrecking anything. Part 2 is the 20-minute build that never needs to be repeated, plus the 90-second habit after each cook that makes it permanent. Part 1 is the Saturday. Part 2 is the next 50 years. And there is one detail in Part 2, a temperature window that most people miss by about 30 degrees, that quietly decides whether your seasoning lasts a decade or a fortnight. It is the single most common reason a pan comes out of the oven sticky. We will get to it. Quick thing before we start. Tell me down in the comments which oil you have been seasoning with and how long it lasted before it started coming off. Just the oil and the number of weeks. I want to see how many of you were sold exactly the same bad advice I was, right? To fix this properly, you have to understand what seasoning actually is, because almost everybody has the wrong mental picture, and the wrong picture is what leads directly to the wrong technique. Most people imagine seasoning as oil sitting on iron, a protective layer like wax on a car or oil on a chain. Something applied on top that sits there and shields the metal underneath. That is not what it is. There is no oil left in a finished seasoning at all. Not a drop. Here is what actually happens. When you heat oil past its smoke point in the presence of oxygen, the fat molecules stop being fat. The long chains break apart, the fragments grab onto each other, and they cross-link into a hard, tough, plastic-like polymer that is chemically bonded to the iron oxide on the surface of the pan. It is not resting on the metal. It has become part of the metal. And the reaction is irreversible. You cannot melt it back into oil any more than you can melt a fried egg back into a raw one. It is the same chemistry that turns linseed oil into a rock-hard varnish on a wooden tabletop. Same reaction, same result, same permanence. Now here is the detail that decides everything, and it is the part nobody tells you. That reaction needs oxygen, and oxygen can only reach the surface. So a film that is thin enough to be measured in molecules cross-links all the way through, top to bottom, completely converted, welded to the iron hard as glass. But a film thick enough that you can actually see, it does something very different. The top of it meets the air, converts and hardens into a shell. The layer underneath it, sealed off from oxygen by the shell that just formed above it, never fully converts. It stays soft. It stays sticky. It stays, in effect, oil, trapped under a hard lid. And this is the cruel part. You cannot tell. It looks perfect. It looks better than perfect because a thick coat comes out glossier than a thin one, and gloss reads to us as quality. So the pans that fail worst are the ones that looked most impressive on day one. Then you cook on it. The iron heats, the iron expands, the soft layer underneath shifts and moves, and the hard shell on top has nothing stable to hold on to. It cracks, it lifts at the edges, and 3 weeks later there are black flakes in your eggs. So let me say the sentence this entire video is built around. That flaking is not seasoning coming off. It is seasoning that was never seasoning in the first place. You built a hard lid over a soft middle, and every time you heated that pan, the middle moved and the lid cracked. You did not under-season your pan. You over-oiled it. Think about varnish for a second. 2 coats brushed on properly thin will outlast the house. That exact same varnish, out of that exact same tin, poured on in a puddle, stays tacky for years and eventually peels off in sheets. Same chemistry, same product, opposite outcome. And the only variable in the whole equation is thickness, which brings us back to what you did every single time it failed. You added another coat. You made the soft layer thicker. The harder you tried, the faster it came apart. That is not a character flaw, by the way. That is just what happens when the instructions are wrong. Now, before I show you the fix, we need to clear out some very popular advice, because some of it is actively making your pan worse and some of it is just going to waste your afternoon. Let us start with the big one. Never use soap. I want to be fair about where this came from because it was true once. Soap used to be lye-based, genuinely caustic, and it absolutely would attack a seasoning. Your grandmother was not wrong. She was just describing a product that no longer exists. Modern dish soap is a mild detergent. It lifts loose fat off a surface. That is the entire extent of its power. It cannot break a cross-linked polymer any more than it can dissolve the varnish on your dining table, and for exactly the same reason. If dish soap could destroy seasoning, seasoning would not survive contact with a greasy steak, which is a far more aggressive chemical environment than a squirt of washing up liquid. But here is why the advice actually causes harm. Because people are afraid of soap, they leave animal fat sitting on the pan. For days, sometimes weeks, and animal fat left on warm metal goes rancid. That stale, slightly sour, unmistakable smell that hits you when you open the cupboard where the cast iron lives is not the smell of a well-loved pan. That is oxidized fat. The rule that was supposed to protect your pan is the reason it smells. Second one, flaxseed oil. And I want to be genuinely fair here too, because the science behind this recommendation is sound. Flaxseed is extremely high in polyunsaturated fats. It polymerizes faster and harder than anything else you can put on a pan. And if you judge a seasoning purely on how hard it cures, flaxseed wins comfortably. That is not marketing. That is real. The problem shows up at about month 4. Flaxseed cures hard, but it cures brittle, with almost no flexibility left in the film. And a cast iron pan is a piece of metal that expands every time you heat it and contracts every time it cools, every single use. A flexible film moves with that and wears down evenly over years. A brittle film cannot follow the movement, so it does not wear. It releases in sheets. So the verdict is not that flaxseed does not work. It is that it works spectacularly for a few months and then leaves all at once. If you are watching this with a pan that flaked off in large, clean, sheet-like pieces rather than gradually going patchy, there is a very good chance flaxseed is why. Third, the self-clean oven cycle. Concede it immediately. It does work. It will take a pan back to raw gray iron. It costs nothing, and it requires no chemicals at all. The cost is that a self-clean cycle runs somewhere around 480 degrees Celsius, and thin vintage iron does not always survive that. Warping happens. Hairline cracks happen. And neither of those is recoverable on a pan that somebody poured a century ago. On top of that, your kitchen fills with smoke, and the burnt residue can damage the enamel inside the oven itself. It works. You are just gambling the pan to save an afternoon, and the pan is the part you cannot replace. And finally, the strongest advice on the internet, which is oven cleaner or a proper lye bath. I am not going to pretend this one is bad, because it is not. Sodium hydroxide saponifies the polymer, turns it into something water-soluble, and takes a pan back to bare iron more completely and more gently than any other method that exists. Professional restorers use lye tanks for precisely this reason, and they are right to. But be honest about what you are handling. Sodium hydroxide burns skin on contact and will permanently damage your eyes. It requires proper gloves, sealed goggles, ventilation, and somewhere safe to dispose of it afterwards, and in reality, most people manage about half of that. And when you are done, you are left with completely bare iron that will flash rust within the hour if you turn your back on it. So here is my honest verdict. If you have found a rusted solid 1915 skillet in a barn, and you want it back, use the lye. It is the right tool. But if you are fixing a pan that you seasoned last spring and it started peeling, lye is a chainsaw for a job that needs a scraper. So let me hand you the scraper. Part 1, the rescue, and this is the part that takes 10 minutes and no protective equipment. Take a generous handful of coarse kosher salt and half a potato, cut side down, or a chainmail scrubber if you have one, and work the pan under hot running water. Coarse salt is the right tool here for a very specific reason. It is hard enough to shear off anything loose and brittle, and soft enough that it will not score the iron underneath. Now, the key instruction, and this is where people go too far. You are only removing what has already failed. Anything that lifts under your thumbnail, anything that flakes, anything that feels rough or raised or crackled that comes off, anything that is smooth, bonded, dark, and does not move, you leave exactly where it is. That is good seasoning, and it is doing its job. You are not trying to get back to factory new. Gray bald patches are fine. A pan that is dark in some places and pale in others is fine. It will even out over the next few months of cooking. You are trying to get to honest, not to perfect. The moment you are done, dry it, not with a towel and then leave it on the side. Put it on a burner over low heat for 2 full minutes until every trace of moisture is gone, including around the handle and the underside of the rim where water hides. Bare iron will start rusting in minutes, and rust that gets sealed underneath a fresh seasoning is a failure you will not be able to see until it is far too late. Now, part 2, the build. This is the 20 minutes. Oven to 230 degrees Celsius, 450 Fahrenheit, with a rack in the middle and a sheet of foil on the shelf below to catch anything. That temperature is not arbitrary, and I will explain exactly why in a moment. Because it is the detail I promised you. 1 teaspoon of oil for the whole pan. 1. Inside, outside, the handle, the underside, everywhere. Uneven curing where the handle meets the body is one of the most common places flaking starts, so do not skip it. And now the step that this entire video exists for. Take a clean, dry cloth or a fresh paper towel and wipe all of it back off. Not most of it, all of it. Wipe that pan like you spilled the oil by accident and someone is about to walk in and see. Keep wiping until the surface looks completely dry and matte and slightly dull. It should look like you never oiled it at all. If it looks even faintly wet, if it catches the light and shines when you tilt it, there is too much on there, and you have just rebuilt the exact failure you came here to fix. The oil that remains soaked into the pores and into the microscopic texture of the iron is more than enough. It is already thousands of times thicker than the layer you actually need. What you are wiping off is not the seasoning. What you are wiping off is next spring's flaking. Then put the pan in the oven upside down and leave it for 1 hour. Upside down so that nothing can pool anywhere. Because pooling is just localized over-oiling, and it will fail in exactly that spot. 1 hour because the polymerization reaction needs time to run all the way to completion, not just to the point where it looks black. When the hour is up, turn the oven off and leave the pan inside with the door shut until it comes down to room temperature on its own. The film is still finishing its reaction as the temperature falls, and a sudden cold shock at this stage is how hairline cracks and microfractures start. Then do the whole thing 3 more times. That sounds like a lot until you count what you are actually doing. Each round is oil, wipe, load. 5 minutes of hands-on work. 4 rounds is 20 minutes of your attention, spread across an afternoon while the oven does all of the real work without you in the room. 4 coats you can barely see will outlast 40 coats you can. Here's how you check the result, and it is a feel test, not a look test. The pan should come out a dull bronze to black, more satin than mirror. If it is glossy, that is usually a warning rather than a win. Run a dry finger across the cooking surface. It should feel like a smooth stone, cool, hard, slightly slick, completely dry. If it drags, or if there is any hint of tack, like the surface of a sweet wrapper, that spot had too much oil on it. Wipe it hard with a dry cloth and give it 1 more hour. It will convert. Now let me be straight with you about what you have and have not just built, because expectations are where most people quit. This is not going to behave like non-stick on day 1. What you have made is a foundation, not a finished surface. It gets slicker with every meal you cook on it, because cooking is the seasoning process. Every time fat hits that hot iron, another molecular layer converts and bonds. The pan is being built by being used, which is the entire point of the object. So for the first 3 or 4 cooks, be strategic. Fry bacon, fry sausages. Do potatoes in a generous amount of oil, anything fatty and forgiving. And for the first couple of weeks, stay away from eggs, delicate fish, and anything acidic like tomatoes or wine, not because it will destroy anything, but because those are the 3 things most likely to make you think it failed when it has not. The honest timeline is this. Properly slick somewhere around cook number 10, noticeably better by cook 50, genuinely excellent in year 3. The pan is not finished when it comes out of the oven. It is finished in about 5 years, and then it keeps improving for another 45. A word on the oil itself, since this is the single most argued about topic in this entire hobby. Use any neutral, refined oil with a smoke point above roughly 200 degrees Celsius. Grapeseed, canola, sunflower, refined avocado, all of them work. Avoid olive oil and butter for this job because they smoke far too early and leave sticky residue that becomes next month's problem. Avoid flaxseed for the brittleness reason we covered. And a small heresy. Plain vegetable shortening or lard is what the original foundries recommended in the instruction booklets that came in the box, and the century-old pans that survived to become heirlooms were almost all built on exactly that. It works perfectly well. But understand the hierarchy here. The specific oil you choose is a detail. The thickness of the layer is the whole game. A thin coat of a mediocre oil will beat a thick coat of the perfect oil every single time, and it is not close. Now, the temperature window I promised you, because this is where a lot of otherwise correct attempts fall apart. Most people season somewhere between 175 and 200 degrees Celsius because that feels like a sensible oven temperature and because a lot of older guides say so. And below the smoke point of your oil, the film never actually polymerizes. It just gets warm. It sits there, it darkens slightly, it looks like something happened, and it stays fundamentally soft. That is why some people follow the thin coat advice correctly and still end up with a tacky pan and conclude the method does not work. The coat was right. The heat was not. You need to be roughly 20 to 30 degrees above the smoke point of the oil you are using. Grapeseed smokes at around 215, which is precisely why the number I gave you was 230. 30 degrees is the difference between varnish and glue, which leads to the practical warning, it will smoke, and it is supposed to. The smoke is the reaction happening. Open a window, run the extractor hood, and warn anyone else in the house so nobody panics. Conversely, if there is no smoke at all coming off that pan, your oven is running cool and you are giving up an hour for very little. Let me cover the 4 things that go wrong, because every pan has a bad day and none of these are terminal. If it comes out sticky or tacky, that is too much oil or not enough heat. Wipe it hard with a dry cloth, put it back at a higher temperature for another hour, and it will convert. Nothing is ruined. If it keeps flaking in the same one spot, the failed old seasoning was never removed from underneath that spot. Go back and strip it properly right there. Your new layer is only ever as good as what is under it. If you get orange rust spots, the pan went away wet. Scrub that area back to bare metal with steel wool, dry it on the burner, oil it, and cure it. Rust is the only problem on this list that is genuinely urgent because it spreads. And if the center goes dull and gray after a few weeks of use, that is not damage. That is normal wear in the highest heat zone. Cook something fatty in it and it will come back. A pan will tell you exactly what you did wrong if you know how to read it. And iron is astonishingly forgiving. There is no mistake here that you cannot walk back, which is more than can be said for almost anything else in your kitchen. Step back for a second, because the real lesson here is not about a pan. The failure was never effort. You worked hard. You did 4 coats, then 5, then 6. The failure came from a belief that more is automatically better, which is the same instinct that makes people overwater houseplants and over-tighten bolts and over-explain in an argument. Cast iron happens to be a material that punishes enthusiasm and rewards restraint, which makes it a genuinely strange object to own in a culture built almost entirely on doing more. And there is a longer frame worth holding, which is that you are not really maintaining this pan. You are holding it for whoever gets it after you. The skillets people fight over at estate sales were never anybody's project. Nobody's grandmother had a seasoning routine or a spreadsheet. Those pans got that way because somebody used them on a Tuesday and then used them again on the Wednesday and did that roughly 10,000 times. The surface was built by dinner, not by maintenance. There is a difference between a thing you own and a thing you keep. The thing you own eventually breaks and gets replaced. The thing you keep gets handed on, and the person who ends up with it will never know your name. They will only know that whoever had it before them took care of it. let us talk about what this costs, because the numbers are genuinely absurd. A bottle of neutral oil you already own. You are using 1 teaspoon per round, 4 rounds. Call it 4 cents. The salt was already in the cupboard. The cloth was already in the drawer. Against that, the old way. Non-stick pans at 30 to 60 each, replaced every 2 to 3 years as the coating wears through. Because that coating is a consumable and always was. Call it 500 over 2 decades, conservatively. Add the $15 bottle of seasoning spray, which is oil and propellant. Add the specialist oil somebody talked you into. And add the worst cost of all, the pan that gets given away or shoved in a garage because its owner concluded reasonably that cast iron just was not for them. Then there is time. 20 minutes of hands-on work once against a lost Sunday every spring for the rest of your life. Stripping, scrubbing, re-seasoning, waiting, redoing it when it fails again. Multiply 1 ruined weekend a year across 20 years, and the old way costs you the better part of a month. And then there is the thing that does not appear on any receipt. Cooking without picking flakes out of the food. Handing a plate to your kids without checking it first, getting to the point where a fried egg slides. Almost nothing you own gets better with use. Your phone degrades from the day you unbox it. Your car depreciates on the drive home. Your non-stick pan is dying the first time you heat it. This is the one object in your kitchen that is worth more after 1,000 meals than it was on the shelf. That is not nostalgia. That is just what happens when the surface is built by the cooking. So here is exactly what to do starting today. Today, strip off whatever is loose with salt and hot water. Dry it on the burner. Then 4 rounds of oil it. Wipe every bit of it back off. 230 degrees, 1 hour. Cool in the oven with the door shut. After every cook, forever, hot water and a stiff brush while the pan is still warm. Dry it on the burner for 1 minute. Then 1 drop of oil wiped almost entirely away. 90 seconds while you are already standing there. Wash warm, dry hot, oil thin. Once a year, or quite possibly never. If it starts looking tired, do 1 single round in the oven. Most pans, cooked on regularly, never need it at all. That is the complete maintenance schedule for the next 50 years. One last thing worth saying. Almost none of the bad advice out there is a lie. It is just advice that comes, directly or indirectly, from people whose business depends on you starting over. There is no industry built around a pan that lasts a century, because a pan that lasts a century shows up exactly once in a lifetime of sales figures. Replacement is a business model. Repair is not. The black flakes in your eggs were never a sign that you had done too little. They were a sign that you had done too much. Tell me down in the comments how old your oldest pan is. Not the newest one, the oldest. I want to see who has the winner, and I want to know if it came from a shop or from a relative. And next week we are covering carbon steel. Why professional kitchens quietly use it instead of cast iron, why it seasons in a fraction of the time, and the one thing about it that nobody warns you about until you have already ruined your first pan. See you then.